Well, car wheel bearings are one of those out of sight, out of mind things. People don't usually give them a second thought till they start rumbling and groaning or worse. I know I was guilty of that. I ignored mine for years until I had a spectacular wheel bearing failure. My front left wheel here, the outer bearing absolutely collapsed when I was doing 115 kilometres an hour down the motorway, and the heat generated just fused the inner race to the actual spindle, completely destroyed the spindle. And it was only because of the fact I have disc brakes on the front that my front wheel didn't fall off, because the caliper held the disc in place. Had this have been drums, I probably would have lost a wheel. Not much fun at 75 miles an hour. By rights, you should really repack them with grease every about 2 years or 30,000 miles, 50,000 Ks, but at least check the bearings for play every 6 months or so. It takes no effort to just jack them up and feel for any sloppiness there, but anyway, it's not a particularly hard job to repack the wheel bearings with grease, so I actually have to fit my new brake discs on, and they don't have any bearings in them, and I've only just put new bearings in these a couple of years ago, so I'm just going to remove them and put them into the new ones. But I'll show how to just remove them and repack them anyway, as well as actually replace them. So if you're just wanting to actually check for play in the bearings first, just to see if they do need adjusting, something that really should be done a couple of times a year, all you need first is the car up in the air with the wheels hanging free. Then you just grab the tyre at the very top at 12 o'clock, just there, and with the other hand at 6 o'clock at the very bottom, and just try and force it in and out. If there's any play there, even if it's only the slightest little bit, that means your bearings need adjustment. But you don't want to do them too tight, otherwise you'll just wear the bearings out really quick and probably have a nice failure like I did. But they also should spin nice and freely, and with no grumbling or groaning, which is a sign that they're crying out for grease. Okay, so I've just loosened my wheel bolts off to give a highly exaggerated view of what you'd be looking for. Obviously, if your wheel bearings were this loose, you would definitely know about it. If it moves like... that's the sort of movement you're looking for, and if you've got movement like that but on a much smaller scale, then your wheel bearings definitely need adjusting. This is actually a factory disc brake setup, but with Volkswagens, because they don't use a separate disc and rotor like most modern cars do, there's very minimal difference between a disc brake and drum brake setup in regards to bearings. All the bearing area is actually exactly the same on both of them, and the only difference in the process is for a disc brake front end like this, you just need to remove the caliper to get the disc off first. So obviously they're both the same with the dust caps. Now on the left side on all Beetles is the speedo cable there. You can just see a little square head with a circlip on it. That needs to come off first. Obviously the little circlip pops off. That just pops off like so. and the speedo cable, which you can see sticking through the back here. It just pulls straight through and gone. Now, getting the dust cap off can be quite fun on a car where they haven't been off for a long time, because my car's been apart so many times they'll just pop straight off. You can see this one actually has a lug on the top and another one on the bottom there, which makes it easier. That allows me to just wiggle it straight off like that. But another method is something like a jimmy bar. You can quite easily just get behind it and lever it off like so. And then we have the there's the bearing tension nut. You can see it's got a Allen key locking grub screw thingy. So that just takes a 6mm Allen key to loosen the lock nut grub screw thingy off. And then if you needed to tension up your bearings, just a simple spanner sits on there like that. And because this is the left hand side and it's got the reverse thread, you would turn it clockwise to tighten it up more, or anti-clockwise, getting asked about there. So anti-clockwise tightens it up, or clockwise is to undo it. So completely opposite for the other side. So then you'll just tighten that up until such times as the slop's gone, which you'll only tell when the wheel's bolted on. So now, because I'm actually removing the bearings completely, if you were to repack them, you would undo that off completely. Turning the right way helps. But before I do that, I'm just going to have to unbolt this brake caliper, which has only just got 2 bolts there holding it on. Simple. Okay, so you can see I've just unbolted the caliper there. That was only 2 bolts, just where it bolts to the spindle. So you wouldn't have to worry about that with disc brake front end. So now that that's off, and I've loosened this, I can just take that right off now. And the front wheel bearing will just pop straight out like that. So there it is there, in amongst all that dirty old grease. Okay, so there's the locking clamp nut, the washer behind it, and the first outer bearing down there, the smaller one of the two. So now with those off, the whole disc will just simply lift off. So with the drum, if that's what it had, but the drum might be a little bit tight. If you're finding that's the case, then you would need to just adjust the shoe tension, pull the shoes in so they're not pushing against the drum so much. So there it is off. Now you can see the inner race sitting in there. If you're just repacking the bearings with grease, you'd leave that alone. Similar story at the back. The grease seal, which needs removing first. The bearing sitting inside. So if I was only repacking, I'd just pop the grease seal out and the bearing out, and then pack them both with grease. Now if you were a complete cheapskate, you could pop the seal out without damaging it, and then reuse it if it wasn't damaged. But seals are cheap, so it pays off just to buy new ones anyway. Now it's simple to remove. If you had a drum, it would look exactly the same as that inside. So to get the seal out, support team on duty here. Pass me a screwdriver and the seal would simply lever out like that. Once that's out, the inner bearing in there can simply be lifted out as well. With that all off now, you've got a much better view of what I've done with the caliper. You can see there's the mount that it normally bolts to, and I've just got it swinging from a bit of wire hooked on my spring. Now these outer races of the bearing, which have to be matched to the bearings that are in, you can't leave them in there and put new bearings in them. They're a press fit, so they have to be driven out. Now to do that, you can see on this new one here, there's 2 slots there either side. So to get this side one out, for instance, you would drive it from the back side out with a drift like that. Just 1 or 2 taps either side and then swap to the other side. Just keep slowly driving it out. And there it just pops out. You need to keep it as square as possible because it's such a tolerance fit. So I just got to clean this up. You can see there's no scoring or wearing in there. That would be the case if it was an old worn out bearing. So I just got to clean it up and then feed it into the new one. But before I can do that, I've got to knock the back bigger inner race out now. So exactly the same procedure, but from the front this time. So there's my 2 outer races all nice and cleaned up. See, there's absolutely no sign or wear in either of them, which I wouldn't expect considering they're only about 30,000 kilometres old. Now, it's crucial that they are tapped in dead square when they're bashed into place. And I find the easiest way to do that is to bash them in with a socket the same size. So my trusty 36mm Volkswagen axle nut socket is absolutely perfect for the inner race, the inner bearing, outer race, that's a mouthful, and the outer bearing, outer race is absolutely perfect with a, what is that, 30mm socket. But different socket kits may vary, but obviously it's important to tap them in the right way. The larger side obviously goes in first, otherwise you won't be able to get the bearing in. And you'll know when it's fully seated. You'll be able to see it's sitting against the bottom ridge there. So flip over, rinse, lather, repeat with the other race wherever the fuck it's gone. Again, large side goes in first so it tapers outwards and nice and square. There it is, home and hosed. Nice and squarely seated in there. So all I've got to do now is grease, clean up the bearings and repack them with grease. Now for the messy part of the job. I've got these all cleaned up. Now I've got to grease it all up so the mess begins. Nice big blob of grease in the palm of your hand and just work it into the rollers in the bearing. Just keep doing that till it's all gone. So with these new seals, they damage very easy, and like the bearings, it's really important that they get tapped in nice and square. So I usually just, that's sat down square now, but normally I use a block of wood over it and tap it in like that. So there's the back one done. There it is, all packed up and ready to put back on. Just got to clean the spindle off on the car and stick it back on. Alright, so all I've done is repacked the inner and outer bearings with new grease. I've reinstalled them in the new discs, installed the new grease seals, stuck them back on the spindles, just done up the locking clamp nut loosely and bolted the caliper back in place. So now all I've got to do is adjust the tension on the bearing. So if I check that now, I'll loosen it off a bit more to show you. There's a bit of movement there now. So and there goes my phone. All I got to do now is bolt a wheel on and do up that clamping nut till I'm happy with it. But the only problem is because I've got to get to this nut and it's not very deep. Can't really do it with alloy wheels. The bores are just way too deep on them. So unfortunately, got to bolt on a standard V-dub rim. Okay, so I've just got the standard steel V-dub rim bolted on. As you can see, I've got nice easy access to the tension nut thing. Now, it's quite important to get the tension just right. Too loose and it will just wear out both the bearings and the spindle, because the bearings will be pushing on the spindle a lot more than normal and wear it on the top section, and just all that movement allows them to slop around and wear out. And on the other end of the scale, too tight, and you're just going to wear the bearings out real quick and end up having a really bad failure like I did. So the key to getting it just right is to get no play in it, but the wheel still spins freely. So if I slacken it off a little bit, left hand thread, I keep turning it the wrong way. So if I undo it a bit, get a bit of movement there. Can't really see it on camera, but I got movement there. So all I'm going to do now is tighten that up just until I can no longer feel the movement. Almost gone. Okay, I can't feel any movement there now, but the wheel still spins freely. you know if you've gone too far, because the wheel just will not spin freely if I tighten that up. The wheel just doesn't want to spin real freely like that. So that is a sign that it's been tightened up too much. So all you then do is just back it off until it spins freely, but there's no play there. And I've pretty much got it on the mark, but I'm going to have to check with two hands. So I've got it at a tension where I'm happy with it. So all that's left to do is lock down the clamping Allen key. It's really important that's tight, because just natural rotation of the wheel, that's why it's a left-hand thread, to try and help it, prevent it from undoing on its own. But yeah, obviously as tight as possible without damaging the Allen key. So that's that done. And there it is done. Obviously it's a good idea once you've been for a quick spin around the block to check the tension on the bearings again, especially with new bearings, as they will want to loosen up once they've worn in a bit more. These ones probably won't because they're old, but it's a good thing to check. Just got to bed in the pads. I should have put new pads on, but they're not very worn, so not going to do that. The only other thing I didn't do, which I was planning on, was reinstalling the factory splash guards, but unfortunately I've lost the bolts for them, and they're an unusual size. It's 7mm thread. I'll have to get some more bolts. I took them off sometime in the late 90s when I had 14-inch wheels on, because they were always rubbing on them. But still got some other brake work to do. Got some new stainless steel hoses to install, and a brand new master cylinder. But for now, that'll do it.